when the world still echoed with the iron footsteps of legions, and the Mediterranean was not yet a sea of broken thrones, but a shining Roman lake, there rose from the ruins of civil war a man who would call himself not king, not dictator, but simply princeps, the first citizen, and by that gentle name, mask an empire of steel. This was Gaius Octavius, whom history remembers as Augustus, the architect of an age that would stretch from the mist of Britain to the sands of Arabia, from the Nile's green ribbon to the dark forests of Germania, an empire so vast that men in a desert fort and men on a cold British wall both said, "I serve Rome." The story of Rome is not just one story, it is a chain of ambition, of law, of cruelty, of genius, of faith. And like every chain, it begins with a hammer blow. The murder of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, the old republic bleeding out on the marble of the Curia. From that wound came a struggle. Octavian, the young heir, Mark Antony, the brilliant general, Cleopatra, the queen of the Nile. But the gods of Rome chose the patient one, the calculating one, the man who understood that power is not only taken on the battlefield, but written into laws, temples, and memory. When Antony fell at Actium and Egypt bent the knee, Augustus wrapped the empire in order. Roads like veins, legions like muscles, governors like nerves, and above all the idea of Rome. Res publica turned imperium. Under him the Pax Romana began, 2 centuries in which ships could sail from Cadiz to Alexandria under one law, in which a merchant in Lugdunum and a scribe in Antioch could both appeal to the same emperor, in which Latin and Greek, like 2 great rivers, irrigated the minds of millions. But peace in Rome was always built on quiet violence, on frontier forts in Dacia, on watchtowers along the Rhine, on desert outposts in Syria where soldiers stared into endless sand and told themselves they were the edge of civilization. In these days, the empire learned to breathe. Aqueducts leapt across valleys, bringing water to cities of marble. Amphitheaters like the Colosseum swallowed 50,000 voices in a single roar. Law was codified so that a citizen could say civis Romanus sum and be protected, and the emperor became something more than a man, a living axis around which the world spun. Yet even in this golden order there were storms, madmen on the throne like Caligula with his theatrical cruelty, Nero with his dangerous vanity, but the Roman machine was so well built that even bad emperors could not break it at once. Then came the age of soldiers, Vespasian practical and stern, who built the Colosseum as a gift to a people tired of excess. Trajan, the conqueror, who drove Roman eagles to the Tigris and made the empire the largest it would ever be. Hadrian, who understood that walls sometimes defend better than spears, and so drew a line in Britain, stone and turf against the wild north, saying, "Roma comes this far and no farther." The secret of Rome was this: it knew when to advance, and at its wisest, it knew when to stop. But no empire can stand still forever. Wealth poured in from provinces, grain from Egypt, gold from Dacia, spices from Arabia, silk moving along dusty eastern roads. And with wealth came disparity, with disparity came unrest, and with unrest came soldiers who realized that the power to crown an emperor is also the power to unmake him. In the 3rd century, the empire shivered. 20 emperors in 50 years. Barracks emperors raised by legions and cut down by rivals. Frontiers splitting. Tribes pressing on the Danube. Persians in the east, striking like a hammer. For a moment, it looked as if the Roman world, this carefully organized miracle, would fly apart like a pot dropped on stone. And then, in one of history's most Roman turns, discipline saved it. Aurelian, the restorer of the world, pulled the fragments together. Diocletian, cold and administrative, said, One man cannot rule all this, and divided the empire, East and West Augustus and Caesar, not as a surrender, but as a strategy. He reformed taxes, chained peasants to the soil, fixed prices, harsh medicine for a sick giant. He even did what no Roman before him dared. He abdicated. But beneath the political repairs, another change was flowing, slow and unstoppable. A faith born not in palaces, but in humble houses, in catacombs, in whispered prayers under persecution. Christianity, once a hunted sect, refused to die. Martyrs' blood watered it. When Constantine unfurled the labarum at the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE and won in this sign, the empire tilted. Now the emperor did not merely command legions, he stood beneath a cross. He founded a new capital in the east, Constantinople, New Rome, seated between Europe and Asia on golden waters, heavily walled, immensely rich, a city that would outlive its mother. But in the west, the old heart, Rome, the eternal city, was growing old. Why? Because power, like water, follows wealth and security. The East had the trade, the universities, the Silk Roads. The West had long frontiers, exhausted lands, ambitious generals, and, worst of all, people on the move. For beyond the Rhine and Danube, the world was changing. Goths, Vandals, Alans, Huns, whole peoples migrating, pressured by steppe riders, smelling Roman riches like a scent on the wind. Once, legions had marched north, and the barbarians had trembled. Now legions were thinner, sometimes filled with those same barbarians, now called foederati, allies who fought for Rome, but loved Rome less than their own chiefs. In 410 CE, the unthinkable happened. Alaric and his Visigoths entered Rome. The city that had humbled kings, burned Carthage, defeated Macedon, seized Egypt, the city thought untouchable, was sacked. St. Jerome cried out, "If Rome can perish, what can be safe?" But even that was not the end. Rome was resilient, an old lion that can still slash. The institutions remained. The Senate still met. Emperors were still declared. Yet the West was bleeding. Provinces like petals fell away. Britain abandoned. Gaul broken. Spain contested. North Africa seized by Vandals, who turned Roman grain ships into pirate fleets. The empire tried compromise. Rule in our name. Call yourself patrician. Send troops when we ask. But every compromise made Rome smaller, thinner, more symbolic. Meanwhile, in the East, emperors in Constantinople still wore purple and spoke of Rome as if it were immortal, but they sent less and less help. And at the center of the Western court, in Ravenna, a young boy emperor sat, Romulus Augustulus, a name that was itself a circle. Romulus, the first founder, Augustus, the first emperor. As if fate wanted to close the book with a signature. Even after 476, Roman law was copied. Roman titles were prized. Roman religion, now Christian, was the faith of the conquerors. The church in Rome, seated in the old imperial capital, took on the mantle of universal authority. Latin remained the language of law and learning. Roads, aqueducts, and cities kept Rome's skeleton standing even when its skin had changed. So what, then, is the meaning of Rome? It is the idea that order can be stretched across diversity, that men from Africa, Spain, Gaul, Syria, and Illyria can all call themselves Roman. That power can be institutionalized beyond the lifespan of any one man. It is also the warning that expansion has a cost. The farther you hold your arms, the harder it is to defend your heart. Rome rose because it was disciplined, adaptive, inclusive of talent. Many of its greatest emperors were provincials, and because it turned conquest into administration. Rome declined because frontiers lengthened, enemies learned, armies became kingmakers. The economy strained, and because the center of gravity shifted eastward while the West faced wave after wave of migration. And yet, in a way, Rome never truly died. Its eastern half, what we call the Byzantine Empire, ruled on for 1,000 more years, calling itself Roman. The barbarians who shattered the West tried to imitate it. The church dressed itself in Roman robes. Later emperors in the West called themselves Holy Roman, claiming a ghostly inheritance. Today, when we speak of republics, of senates, of civil law, of roads, of citizenship, of an authority that is above tribe and clan, we speak Roman. Picture then our cinematic frame. From the high dawn over the Forum in Augustus's day, marble glowing eagles glittering to the smoky dusk of 5th century Rome. Statues toppled granaries, empty, frightened senators bargaining with foreign kings. Between those two images lies nearly 5 centuries of drama, of triumphal marches, of legions building bridges across rivers, of engineers dropping aqueduct arches into place, of philosophers debating in Latin and Greek, of Christians singing in catacombs, of emperors crowned and murdered, of walls built and broken. It is an empire told not just in battles, Actium, Teutoburg, Edessa, Adrianople, but in the less visible victories. The moment a provincial child writes his first line in Latin, the day a merchant in Gaul uses Roman coinage to buy Egyptian grain, the hour a persecuted faith becomes the empire's soul. In the end, standing amid fallen columns, we can say this: Rome was a human attempt to make eternity, and though its armies could not hold forever its idea that law, infrastructure, culture, and shared identity can bind millions, crossed the ruins and walked into the future.